of the 2015 Game Narrative Summit. Thank you so much for coming back and filling the room. I'm told belatedly that I'm not supposed to be telling you exactly where we're meeting up later, so ask each other if you're not sure. Who knew? Anyway, I won't hold things up further because we've got, as you can see, a magnificent six here to talk to you about some wonderful things that have gone on in the past and I'm sure will be going on in the future at Telltale Games. So I'll turn it over to Tom.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's wonderful to see so many people here. Welcome to When the Story is the Gameplay, our attempt to get to the bottom of, discuss, celebrate, dissect, vivisect the Telltale Games method, style, and the magic of it and how they do what they do. My name's Tom Bissell. I'm a writer of games and books, and I thought just to start, we would just go down the line and just briefly introduce ourselves. So, Nick, please.
I am Nick Brecken, a writer at Telltale.
Pierre Charette, writer at Telltale.
Kevin Bruner, the co-founder and CEO of Telltale.
I'm Ryan Kaufman, a creative director and director of design.
Mark Darren, creative director and designer.
Those introductions were much briefer than I thought they would be.
I could go on.
I know, we could do much longer if you want.
So let's start with a little bit of history. So I'm not quite a Telltale OG, but in 2010, during the Slate Gaming Club, which is a convocation of critics to put their favorite game experiences of the year and talk about them, I included Jurassic Park, the Telltale Jurassic Park game. Anyone give it up for the... which I really enjoyed. And and this is to give you a sense of how different Telltale's reputation was back in 2010. Some were like, that point and click Jurassic Park game? But I remember by you playing through it, I saw the shimmering of something really cool and interesting happening. And so by the end of the 4-episode arc, I realized that, holy cow, these guys are onto something really special and interesting. And then so I think I was slightly less surprised than a lot of people were when Walking Dead came out, because it seems to me that that was the crystallization of what you guys learned on that. So I would love to hear you guys talk about the transformative process of what you learned on that game in particular and what the eureka moment was for storytelling, bringing it into from Jurassic Park to Walking Dead.
You want to start, Kevin?
Yeah. I think a lot of things. I think Jurassic Park has got some amazing things in it, and it's a flawed game. But if you haven't played episode 4 of Jurassic Park, you should, because there's a fantastic underwater shark sequence that is top notch. I think when we started Telltale, we love adventure games, we love story in games, but adventure games kind of were in a dark place in 2004 when we started. And we really rolled up our sleeves with the idea of like, okay, we want to find out why these things aren't working. What is it that's weird about it? And every project that we had done along the way kind of had a creative agenda, it had a technical agenda, and we were self-publishing, so we kind of had a publisher agenda. And I think Jurassic Park was when a few of those started to come together. Like, you see little bits and pieces in our previous work, whether it's more traditional point-and-click adventure games or the CSI games that we did. We were experimenting along the way, and Jurassic Park, we were like, okay, let's put the results of some of those experiments in the same thing at the same time. And like I said, it's definitely a milestone along the way. There's flaws, but there's also some real gems in it. And I think that's, one of the things. It was the first game that had timed dialogue that we did, so that the dialogue, pacing was a big thing. We were like, we want these games to not slow down. They have to keep moving. That was a big kind of compromise that we thought point-and-click adventure games had, was they would slow down. So there's all these kind of elements come crashing together on Jurassic Park. And then we did some things that were just a little too far, like we cut walking. Turns out that you guys like walking around in video games. But I think that's always been our grounded in this idea that this genre that we really loved and really embraced was relatively obtuse and misunderstood by the big gaming market, and we wanted to solve that problem. And so Jurassic Park was really kind of our first, like, if we really want to go to everybody instead of just people who like adventure games, what would it look like?
And I was one of the lead designers on that project at the time, and I was really excited about experimenting with the kind of gameplay that we were going to impose. We really had this opportunity to delve into this rich canon and in this story world that was amazing. And just kind of looking at it at a surface level, the type of point-and-click adventure games that we'd been picking in the past wasn't going to service the story that we wanted to tell. So we really had to challenge ourselves to kind of think outside of the box and think of what are some new ways that we can try to tell this story that isn't what was in our comfort zone at the time. And so there's a lot of experimentation, and we learned a lot from trying these new kind of swapping characters on the fly. And by taking walking out meant that we had to explore the environment in a different way and explore the way that we're interacting with characters in a completely different way. And a lot of what we learned out of that went into what we did with Walking Dead, which made that very successful. But we were very conscious of the interactivity level that was left out from Walking Dead, and making sure that we're servicing that in our future games going forward. But it was exciting and challenge at that time, and we made a couple mistakes.
We learned an awful lot.
But there was a lot that we learned, and Walking Dead would not have been possible without having been bold enough to kind of experiment in that way. And there was still some really, really good storytelling. I'm really happy with the story that came out, and the characters and the way that the characters were developed by the writers. It was all really good stuff, and I was very proud of the team, of what we put out.
Anyone else?
Who here has played Jurassic Park? Okay. Now, go back and look at episode 4 again. Available on iTunes.
So I've talked in depth to like the creative brain trust behind games like Gears 1, Far Cry 2, Uncharted 2, BioShock, and they all have something in common, which is none of them had any idea the lightning that they'd bottled. And the reception of those games was to almost all of them like a very pleasant and shocking surprise. And you know, these games are now looked at as some of the premier sort of console game experiences of the last few years. So I'm curious, now, did you guys, when you were making Walking Dead, and I suspect I know the answer to this, did you have any idea that you had basically figured out this amazing storytelling method that was just going to blow up to the degree that it did?
No, we had no idea. I mean, again, like we started Telltale so we could kind of do our own thing, and I think we live in constant fear. You know, we were coming off of Monkey Island, which had really high expectations. You know, we've kind of dabbled with stuff that is precious to people. And I mean, we were sweating bullets when Walking Dead went out because it was so weird. We were like, there's not a lot of puzzles in this. There's not a lot of, Jurassic Park had regular puzzles in it, like logic puzzles, and like we took all of that stuff out, and we were like, it's just going to be about the choices you make, and everybody's going to get the same ending, and this is going to be very different and very weird, and I think since then, even with the stuff after that, with Fables and Thrones and Borderlands, I mean, Borderlands, everyone's like, how are you going to do a Borderlands game? That doesn't even make sense. So, I mean, every time something comes out, we are terrified of how it's going to be received. And when Walking Dead was very well received, I think it was hugely flattering and really kind of nice to be recognized for it. But I don't think we were trying to build kind of the world's, greatest anything. We just wanted to build something that we thought was good.
At the time, I was very nervous. I did not understand the concept of story as gameplay. So I'm seeing the story coming in, and I'm understanding that we're making some choices. But as a designer, I'm looking for the mechanics. Where are the mechanics of this game? Where are the puzzles I can solve? And I'm getting very nervous that people are going to say, there's no gameplay. It's just all story. I can just click through it. But it's not just clicking through it, and it took a long time for me to understand what it is that you're clicking, what it is that you're hooking into in the story, and how you're playing that game can be the meat of the story. But when we were making it, I had no idea what we were making.
I remember one of the first times that I felt like this could really work was when we were experimenting with the choice notifications. Herschel will remember that. And it's that scene when you're on the porch and he's questioning Lee about, how did you get here, and all this stuff about, and you're trying to hide the fact that you were riding in the back of a police car with handcuffs on. And then some of those notifications started to come in, and I thought, oh, okay, this is the game. Like sitting on a porch with a guy, trying to figure out what to tell him so that he won't kick you out, and you're gonna not, lose Clem. Like that's when it really clicked for me. And I remember thinking, wow, if the whole game is this, we might really have something here. And the team just blew the doors off of it.
You guys?
Yeah, I think the writing on this side of the table, writing is represented. And one of the things that was special too is when that is the mechanic, it all comes down to the writing and the dialogue and the characters. And we did a lot more actual character development, and and we continue to do it, but you guys can talk a little bit about what writing for design is like.
Well, yeah, I mean, at a certain point, it's interesting talking about older versions of adventure games, because you have, the traditional inventory systems and, puzzles, and at a certain point, though, like, I think the things that you guys are talking about right now is, like, getting to the point where the characters are the puzzle, and, like, how interesting is it to externalize that stuff in somebody that feels, or, where we're attempting to feel real. I think in terms of our process, it really comes down to marrying, like, a good design moment with a good story beat, and how do we do that, and how do we make that mesh. And it always comes down from the writing angle is, just how do you motivate the player to want to do these things, So we think a lot about character motivation and how that factors into the design of a scene.
Yeah, and I came into it as a fan. So I was a fan of Walking Dead Season 1, was interviewing during Episode 3, hit the Doug Carling moment in Episode 3 that some of you might know about. Reset my machine 4 or 5 times thinking that I broke it. And then just got to jump in and realize that I love these games. I like the fact that Telltale makes, in most games, you play through and it feels like I go through this mechanical piece and then I got the carrot, which is the narrative. So Telltale games make the carrot so much bigger. All I thought was, this is the good percentage for me. I'm glad that other people share that feeling. So,
Well, this brings up my next question, which is the kind of sweet spot I think you guys are talking about, where the mechanic becomes the choice and where the character becomes the puzzle. Because at least once an episode in every Telltale game, I get to what I call the "oh, go to hell" moment when I'm just presented with some decision. It's just like, oh, really? Come on. These are not good choices. So you guys fall in this sweet spot of kind of low-octane character-to-character conversations. Herschel and Lee on the porch is a great one. But video game narratives are generally, shall we say, high-octane. And I would love to hear you all talk about that sweet spot that so many developers have tried and failed to hit. Like, what do you think? Is it the fact that the conversations are timed? Is it the quality of the performances? Is it all those things? I would just love to hear your own sort of.
I personally think it's caring about the characters. So being in a situation where you're actually having to make moral decisions or decide how you're going to talk to someone or approach a situation, the fact that I actually care about these characters that are just sitting there staring back at me, which I'm so used to not caring about in the game space. I think investment in that is the thing that makes this all possible.
And I mean, it really, yeah, it's a marriage of all of that, right? I mean, like we spend a lot of time, getting the, not me personally, but we have a huge team of people at Telltale whose job it is to make the performance of, the actor, of the, the character model to match the voice performance. And then, we'll spend tons of time, in the voice booth, revving on, a couple of lines over and over again to make sure that voice matches the character. So like, all of those components have to sort of sync up. And for us, it's just about like finding the process that makes all of that really efficient. And I think, that's been a lot of the recent, last few years.
Yeah, just to echo what Nick's saying, like going over things with a fine-tooth comb is part of how we get there. I think absent a whole ton of other like driving around the city type of gameplay, we sit there and we think about each of these moments and we think about every single choice that we offer you. Like those choices don't happen by accident. We really, really agonize over each one and make sure, are we allowing you to say what you need to say or express what you need to express as a player, but still bring it down to kind of 3 essential things plus silence. And that's a hyper focus on the content and the characters and the dialogue and the music and everything that, certain other games, if you're bigger and you're handling a lot of those stuff, maybe you don't have the time to do it, but I think at Telltale, that's our passion, that's our focus. So we spend that time and we really, really make sure that those smaller moments sing just like a big volcanic moment might.
You would, the absurd amount that we geek out over every one of those, every time a dialogue choice comes up, I mean, excruciatingly, 6 people sitting around a table for days talking about the words that the display text are and what it might mean inside the player's head and what's going on in the character's head at the same time. I mean, the fine-tooth comb.
Yeah,
is,
we'll have arguments over prepositions.
Yeah.
It can't be of, that ruins it.
Prepositions are important. But I mean, when you think about, our games are short and there's about, maybe like 120, 130 of those choices that pop up in an average episode, we actually offer very little to on how you can put your imprint and have your personality be injected into the game. Like the amount of inputs that like Super Mario 64 takes in 60 seconds is probably the equivalent to the amount of input we take in 2 hours. Input is really precious to us, and learning about who you are as a player and figuring out where your head is at and how the characters in the game might respond to that and what's the right thing to offer. That's where most of our energy goes. We spend a huge amount of time working out the games on pen and paper or a virtual pen and paper. But before there's a 3D where you see lights and characters walking around, we've put a lot of person months into that with a lot of really smart, talented people, from artists to writers to designers, to everybody before it comes to life, before we get in the studio and record stuff. Every single beat is excruciatingly talked about and contemplated. It's really rough on these guys because they have there's so many fingerprints on. They're trying to own the characters and all that, and that gets right. I don't know if you guys want to talk about that side of it.
No, it's awesome. It's always awesome.
Yeah.
He's lying.
I'll just stuck behind there for a little bit. You can get
No, I mean, it's part of the job. It's just, I mean, if you're writing in any field, you've got to go into it with the understanding that you're going to, if you're a freelance journalist or anything, you're going to blow away your own work 10 times. Right? We have the luxury of having, tens of dozens who can get their eyes on the thing and just make it better over the course of months and years. So I mean, it's part, but that being said, there's still that exciting moment where it's just a couple people in a room just crunching on an idea, and just you still have that spark moment where you just have this very concise idea of like what a scene could be, and generally speaking, 90% of that will still make it through at the end of the day if it's good, And that's an exciting thing. That feels unique for what we can take that idea and just put it into the game so fast at Telltale.
Yeah, that's one of the, well, yeah, the production process is fast, but that's the other thing about geeking out about it really hard, is you really kind of start to understand like where the hallowed ground is. And it's like when you find it, you're like, oh, this is going to be so great. And like stuff starts coming fast. But it's taken a lot of years to figure out like when all the pressures are equally balanced and the character motivations and where the player is at and what we're able to produce and what the actors can bring to the table and all of that stuff. When those things start to resonate, then it's just like it's magic at that point.
Yeah.
Pierre also talked about how much you care about the characters, and I've noticed from our writers that taught me it's not just about caring about the characters, it's the respect that they have for those characters. And the writers are always super conscious that these characters aren't just throwaway characters or not just stereotypes, that these are people, and you've got to respect the people in the game. And kind of adding to that is the respect that we have for the audience, the people playing the game, that we're not writing characters are going to do stupid things that you don't agree with, that just detach you from the character. We believe that you are going to be caught up in this conversation that is our games, and you want to contribute, and we want to respect you as well as respect the characters. And I think that's a huge part of making those simple conversations feel real and feel like they're engaging as well.
Most of the stuff I've written for video games has been collaborative, and I found that just like the absolute best rhetorical Molotov cocktail to throw at someone is don't sell out the character. Because what the hell are you going to say? I was? Well, I don't want to do that. It's just, but it's true. It's like a true point. You don't want to sell out these fictional people for some agenda that's beneath the character's dignity. I think it's an important thing to
It's true. And
remember.
sometimes it's conflicting because you want a certain type of gameplay, and that gameplay is going to undermine what the character wants, and we have to find that sweet space that you said, where it feels like we're not throwing out the character for the sake of a gameplay moment that isn't necessarily supporting that narrative. We've got to all make sure it's all married together in that perfect blend.
So my next question is kind of a can of worms, one that I suggest we open anyway. But it's the is it a game question that plagues stuff like Gone Home on one end of the spectrum and The Order 1886 on the other end of the spectrum. So I don't want to get into it too much about you guys defending your games from the accusation, but I do wonder if you, when you're developing your episodes, do you ever stop and think, wait, there's too much story in this, or how do we what is the balance for you?
Whether they're games or not, we don't really care.
That's the
There was
best answer.
actually,
That's the best answer.
When we started the company, when we named the company, there was a hot debate over whether we should put the word games in the title, because we didn't really care if they were games at that point either. But it's 2004, and the world is Google-based and text-based, and you're searching for the new Game of Thrones game because it runs on your Xbox. It kind of makes sense to be games. But like a lot of our backgrounds and a lot of the way that we kind of deal with it is really just, it's kind of like when you play D&D with a good DM, or we love technology and we love storytelling, and we just want to mash the things we love together and make it work. And that's a little different than, and we love video games as well. And I think everybody up here could do a hell of a job designing a platformer or any kind of video game interactive experience. We don't have any disdain for that. But our real passions are character development, writing, and playing with computers and software, like when you did when you were a little kid. So we just keep trying to mash those two things together, and gaming is where that lands. That's now we're kind of emerging where like tablets, like I read books on my tablet and I play Telltale games, but I play Call of Duty on my Xbox. So the world's kind of meeting us halfway a little bit these days, where things don't really have to be games as much. But we look at what we do as interactive scripted narrative, or scripted entertainment, or playable stories. All the good words are are tarnished and tainted. Interactive movies, interactive TV, but I think if you chip away at it long enough, it turns into something interesting and good. I'm just curious, who here thinks we're games, or who here thinks we shouldn't be called games? Okay, good.
A very
Everybody
brave
pick on
person
him.
raised their hand. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of what you guys do a little bit. For any us like aspiring video game writers in the audience, I'm going to let you in on a little bit of a secret, which is no matter how much you plan ahead, no matter whatever your aspirations are for getting stuff done, getting stuff totally worked out in your own head, like a shocking amount of video game writing gets done in a blind panic the night before it's going to get recorded, because what happens is there's so much implementation and that fails, and there's so much iteration, and stuff gets changed on the fly so often, and these like unavoidable record dates just sit there looming like one of those statues on Easter Island, and you're just staring at it, and then suddenly you have to write, and it's getting recorded, and it's for real. And because you guys are so story-centric and so dialogue-centric, I would love to just know that that happened to you too.
So anyone play Tales from the Borderlands? Cool. So there's a scene like where you're underneath the facility in the arena with Reese and Sasha, and you're on the two catwalks. You're walking, and you're trying to take out a bandit. So that scene got rewritten overnight, and it's terrifying because it's a first draft, and that's not really how you want to approach the world with your first draft work. But but the big ideas of the scene have been the same the entire way. So you have a foundation to build off of, so it feels like you've been working on versions of the scene in your head for months, so you have something to fall back on. And I suppose as long as the core of the idea is strong, then you're going to land in a place that is entertaining and works.
Yeah, you never do your first draft the night before, and that's kind of that
Right.
iteration process where like what was going to happen in that underground scene went through a lot of different versions that got explored and rejected for like it wasn't fun for the player or it wasn't interesting for the characters. And, and I think you get, like in that scenario, you get some momentum and it's the night before and you're like, I got the perfect thing.
Right, so
And it turns out to be amazing. So
It was okay.
it was pretty good.
It was okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely typically like we'll write a big chunk, like a first draft run at the episode, and yeah, really like we're allotted a good amount of time to get that done, and the fast iteration is when we're sort of heavy into the back half of the production, and we're doing like. I've rewritten lines in the voice booth, but it's because you're so familiar with the material at that point that you just can, and you know what it needs to be. You can feel it. You're familiar with the voice actors at that point. You're familiar with the scene and what the scene can support, because that's the other thing is we have to, at a certain point we built out enough of the game that we have to kind of account for how much time is left and what we can do. But you get, after a couple of these games, you get better at that, and so you kind of know how much leeway you have in that last minute dash. Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned the voice actors, and when you have really strong voice acting talent,
Yeah.
they bring an element to the story and the game and the characters, and some of those rewrites in the booth are the best stuff
Yeah.
that we do, and it's just more collaboration with more talented people at that point.
I've gone into a voice recording session before where our voice actress was super pregnant, so she wasn't going to be around for the upcoming recording sessions. So I went in with a handful of lines that she could say for a scene that hadn't been written yet.
Oh, that's tough.
It worked out, but it was scary.
That's story Jenga. So I've heard you guys talk about something I find really fascinating, which is a core conceptual mechanic, I guess you'd say, which is regret and remorse, like asking players just quite simply to live with the consequences of their decisions in the games that you make. So in preparation for this, I played through most of your games again, and with the full intention of doing an asshole run through season 1 of Walking Dead with Lee and Clementine. And even though I know it's all fake, and even though I played it again and I know it's just a game, I could not be an asshole to that little girl. Like as Bigby Wolf, I'm ripping people's arms off, and like I'm like, yeah, I'll do that, sure. But there's something about that relationship that I could not betray. So I wonder if, it seems to me like regret and remorse are really an underutilized emotional resource for our games to try to tap into. It seems like so much about games are about the opposite of that. And if you guys can talk to that about, because you've given us some truly agonizing moments. And I'd love to hear you all talk about maybe your own favorite personal agonizing moment in a Telltale game.
What are me for?
Actually, before, I just want to say one thing. It's interesting the way that you talk about playing through and making the same choices that you made, because I think that that almost to me feels like, in a way, like when I play like a strategy game or something, I find myself falling into sort of paradigms of like what I'm going to do. If I'm playing SimCity, I know I'm always going to play it in a certain way. So it almost feels like that might be a slight defense of our games as games in a way, because it feels like, oh, that's just the way that you're going to play that game. Like we're allowing you that space to sort of express yourself. But yeah, in terms of a miserable moment, I don't know. You guys have favorite agonizing choices?
I mean, I know the ones that affected me. I mean, I picked Carly,
Oh, yeah.
and that around the office, people are Doug guys, so Doug guys and girls. So so that puts me in the minority internally. But yeah, I mean, that was as tough a choice as anything I'd come across in a game so early on. Yeah.
With Fables, I think, since you looked at me, I looked at you. I think with Fables, we almost based the entire season on regret and remorse. Like, that whole world, those characters are so saturated in regret and remorse. And one of the first things that Pierre and I figured out was like this whole serial killer with Faith, and like introducing Faith and having her, spoilers.
It's the onus is on them at this point. It's out there. So experience it. It's all right.
So Faith dies, and very early on in episode 1, and the rest of the season. I mean, the rest of that episode and the rest of the season are really driven by, hopefully, this sense of remorse and regret that you had this chance encounter with this woman, and she was in a bad spot, and there wasn't a lot you could do about it. You tried to do your very best, which I think is lighting her cigarette and giving her $50, right? And that was something that, Pierre really brought that like tone and that sense of regret and remorse and awfulness. Thanks, Pierre, for bringing
You're
awfulness
just
to the game.
blaming me.
When you need awfulness, go to Pierre. But that was really, I think from Walking Dead, we learned that's a powerful emotion for players. That unresolvable thing, you're like, I can't make this right. We learned that on season 1 of Walking Dead, and then going into Fables, doubled down on it in the first episode and said, what if there was a character whose whole backstory was all of that, and you wanted to live inside that guy's skin. So that's where we went with Bigby, and I think, I was happy with how that came out in an awful way.
We often use the paradigm of no good deed goes unpunished. And we talk about how the world pushes back against the player a lot, like a Telltale game is kind of like a shoving match with the player. And when you do that, when you make the world react, it's funny because it's a storytelling game, which when you talk about trying to make the world react, those are kind of at odds. There's a lot of kind of interactive stuff that are about you being told a story instead of the story reacting to you. But when we talk about trying to make the world push back and interesting and plausible to the characters in the world, but also really interesting from the player's perspective on like the world pushes back in really kind of strategic and interesting ways, it doesn't let you get away with being an asshole. If like raining, like in SimCity, you destroy everything that you've built. You're like, haha, that was kind of fun. But if you try to destroy what you've built in one of our games, everybody's sad. And you don't get the joy of like, haha, I knocked over all my toys and now I get to rebuild them again. We just don't, we feel like if we let you get away with that, then we're not doing our job of making the characters and the story worlds real and plausible. And then you're kind of hooked back in. You're like, oh yeah, I can't be mean to Clementine or abandon the people of Fabletown or screw over House Forrester or any of these things.
Send Toad back to the farm.
Yeah. And then sometimes you have to, and then it really sucks.
Yeah. And there's a real trickiness to that because from a design standpoint, we want you to be able to be as bad or explore the character or whatever we want to do it, but we don't want the game to ever reflect that your decision was a bad decision and make you say, oh, I played it wrong, I want to go play it right. You want to be able to support all those bad decisions you make and still look back on it and say, oh, yes, that was bad, bad things happen, everybody hates me, but I would have made that decision again. I stand by it, and that's really tricky to get, and we've had some stumbling blocks. I think there was the Lee and Kenny's relationship in episode 2 when we're able to get Kenny like really mad at Lee, and a lot of players felt like I've been being nice to Kenny, and there's an event here that the game did that turned Kenny on me, and I don't feel like the game was playing fair. And so it's a very tricky balance to make the decision you're making feel like you want to stay with them as bad as they are.
Well, and you also have all those interstitial scenes, right, between those guys that can't really be canted any particular hostility level because I assume that they're the stitching between any number of choices you can make.
Right.
And like getting the right energy to those scenes, I imagine just must be such a mind bender.
And that's why we call it a tailored narrative at the beginning of the scene. If you play different playthroughs side by side, and even if you play them back to back, particularly with some of the newer stuff, it feels like the same story, but there's actually a lot of like individual lines of dialogue and shots that are tailored to people liking you, people not liking you, to reinforcing some difficult decisions and some perceptions that the game may have of you along the way, and that's where it gets super subtle, but I think that's where people really respond, and everybody up here is getting really good at a lot more detail on it's kind of basically the same scene, but we can knock it in an interesting way with a well-placed camera cut here or there, a well-placed line at one place or another that means, like if somebody gives you if you were a co-conspirator with somebody and they give you kind of a crazy glance or something, you know what that means. And you can just put that in a context, and it can change the complexion of a scene entirely. And that's kind of the really highly evolved stuff that we're doing now with Thrones and Borderlands. The tailoring is a lot more fine. It's not like, do you want to leave in the daytime or the nighttime anymore? It's we still do that kind of very coarse level of stuff, but the detail stuff is getting really good as well.
I often tell my new designers, when they ask like, well, what does a designer really do at Telltale? Because the writing is so strong, I say, think of it this way. The writers represent the characters, the NPCs, the dialogue, how it's said, the tone of the piece. And the designers represent what does the player want to do at any given moment. So you're kind of like the player's advocate. But the two of those things merging together create what I call story with a capital S. Like that is a merged collaboration between somebody sitting there with a controller and then everything that like Pierre and Nick and all these guys have written, like, and the performance of the voice actors and all that stuff comes together to create You know, like this, I just have this idea of this capital S story that's like something between the two. And it's hopefully slightly different for every person. Like Kevin said, it's like this tailored thing.
So we talked about the Borderlands new Telltale series briefly, and not enough hands went up when I asked who's played it, because it's been my favorite Telltale game series so far, and it just totally knocked me out. And I say this as someone who has, sorry. I mean, I played the Borderlands games and I enjoyed them enough, and you know, liked the games, but I wasn't expecting to just love the world as much as you guys made me love it. And so my question is, you guys do all these licensed games that come with, shall we say, a lot of canonical baggage. And I'm wondering if a world that was relatively, or at least perceived to be, baggage-free and that sort of a little bit lighter canonically, if that gave you a lot more freedom to just mess around and dick around and have a good time.
So anyone who is a big Borderlands fan would know that there's a ton of stuff out there for Borderlands.
Well, I will see you guys later.
But I do think that digging into that and working with cool people, cool collaborators, they let you express what the story needs and allows you to take it in the directions that they don't have an opportunity to explore in the type of game that they have. So, I don't know, guys like Anthony have been super helpful in helping us shape the type of story that we want to tell. And also, just, we're also hands-off when we wanted to do things that maybe we thought were scary pitches, but they were super into it because it was telling a great story within their world and were great to work with. And it's sort of, I feel like that's been the case with a lot of people we work with.
There's a lot to be said about inhabiting a great world. As Walking Dead came with a lot of canon in itself. There was the plethora of story that was already laid out, but there was a world that was largely unexplored. And finding our place in that world just lets us expand what's already there and create brand new stories that we can bring brand new characters in and explore what that means to have these new characters in that same world. And that's where I draw a lot of that inspiration from.
Do you guys find like licensed stuff versus new IP stuff? I know you can't make any big announcements, but you did make a recent big announcement of new stuff that you guys are up to and are going to do. So my question has to do with this type of game that you do and that you seem to have nailed down, the style of presentation, the sort of core mechanics that you do, the tone. Do you feel pressure to do a different kind of game ever? Or is this the kind of game you guys want to do? Forever.
You mean like, would we make like a racing game? Or?
No, I mean, but you know, because like there's moments in Walking Dead where you know, there's like shooting sequences sometimes and stuff like that. And I'm not asking if you're ever going to make a shooter, but the question is.
It's funny. I think we really just try to respect the IP and respect the story, right? And you're not going to, you know, you're not going to make a Walking Dead game without shooting. You're not going to make a Borderlands game without driving around in crazy contraptions and big action sequences. As much as, or kind of alongside the respect we have for writing and crafting characters and game design, cinematography and visual storytelling is very revered in the studio as well. And that's why we don't do over-the-shoulder chase cams. Every single camera setup in a Telltale game is authored by somebody. We know every position a camera will ever be in any shot in a Telltale game. And when we think about like, how do you do shooting and how do you make it feel like a cinematic experience? You know, we do a lot of QTEs because that's kind of the state of the art right now for doing kind of cinematic action sequences. But right now we're actually really invested heavily in trying to break, to see what's on the other side of QTEs, like
Yeah.
we were kind of doing it in what's on the other side of dialogue trees
Well,
and puzzles.
I guess this was a more artful version of my question was, is there a way to play this story that beyond people talking to each other that you guys like, because that seems like a tough problem to solve.
Yeah, like, so kind of the way we've been telling stories is pretty constrained. Before Game of Thrones and Borderlands, we were pretty much single POV. We couldn't do all the storytelling techniques of like, you get to see what's going on in the bad guy's lair, because then you as the player would know more than what the character knew, and that was a problem for us. With Borderlands and Thrones, we've been able to switch POVs, and actually if you play Jurassic Park switches POVs willy-nilly. Just, you'd be playing Jess for one line of dialogue, and then playing, oh geez, what's her dad's name?
Jerry.
So terrible. Jerry.
Right, yeah, that's-
But it was super organic. It was just, that's the interesting thing for the user to do. It's more like a God game than a character-driven game. And those are, different ways of us expanding the storytelling palette, doing it with action sequences, with QTEs. I personally get really excited about the idea of God game story games where you're playing the story instead of role-playing as a character in the story. But that's like crazy into the future. And we have R&D efforts over the years. Walking Dead came out of an R&D effort that was actually called the Zombie Prototype before we signed Walking Dead, which was strange. But so yeah, we always play around with it. But I think one of the things that we intentionally, we don't have a physics engine. We didn't have a effects engine until we signed up for Borderlands, because you kind of need it to be true to the Borderlands universe. We kind of purposefully tie one kind of arm behind our back and say, we're not going to do shooting the way everyone else does shooting. We're not going to do driving the way everyone else does driving. We're not going to do a physics puzzle. Nowadays, we're not going to do a logic puzzle. We're going to reject all the traditional stuff. And that's kind of what happened with Walking Dead. We just pulled everything out and said, if it's just all about the story and the characters and the user, then what do you do? And there's a ton of ground left to cover on that front. It's hard to write stories from a single POV. And then we have two POVs, and they're both together, and one's a player character.
Yeah.
That person's kind of like got to not do the things that the player is like, why are they doing that? I wouldn't do that.
Yeah. I mean, a lot like, if you look at traditional games, they're built around like big repetitive mechanics, right? And that just doesn't make sense for a lot of the stories we want to tell, right? Like, we're not going to throw a cover shooter into The Walking Dead, cover shooter mechanics. So I think what we focus on generally is finding just interesting gameplay moments, right? And I think that's to me, it's almost a luxury, because you can say, we have amazing cinematic artists at Telltale, like the best in the industry. And, they just have a lot of fun just finding, what can we do with this shooting sequence that feels different, than what a shooter would even do, I don't know. It's sort of liberating in a way.
And all those other genres are so refined. When we try to do aiming, oh my God, it comes off like first graders are trying to do it. We don't have the Unreal Engine, and we don't have, precision mice and all the things like that. Those strategy games, shooting games, driving games, like all of those are really, really refined. And even if you try to emulate them, even as an homage, it's just, you can't even do a proper homage to them without really rolling up your sleeves and doing all the detail work that's required to make those great. So it's kind of like we just throw in the towel. And we're like, we're never going to be able to do that. And if we do it, then the story's going to suffer anyway. So we have to invent a new palette of ways to describe this stuff.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. We're going to open this up for some questions. I believe some of the kind folks in the yellow shirts in back will help you, guide you, aid you. Let's start right here in the middle. Sir, yes.
So really excited. I My name's Owen. I teach at RIT, and when my students tell me they're passionate about narrative, I say, have you played through all the Telltale games like crazy, right? So that's the first place I'm telling them to go look. So I have so many questions, but two are. One is I'd love if you could break down what the writer's room is like from when you get your first block story, how you're thinking about arcs, how episodes are created, and then what's the interplay like? We've got little snippets of some of the dilemmas that you've had and the preposition arguments, but can you give us a sense of what the writer's room looks like kind of from beginning to end of an episode? And second, when you're looking at portfolios, what's really impressive to you when someone delivers a writing portfolio? Are you looking at them? And two, when you see them, is it, how many TV credits they've had, or what their graphic novels are, or what their games are? I mean, those two questions would be great to learn about.
Well, Nick just got out of a writer's room, so he's totally prepared.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have, at least a 2-week kickoff for a season where we get basically every major stakeholder in the room. Often as much as we can, the people that we're working with on properties, but, writers, the lead designer, Kevin, often, and just for 2 weeks, we just grind out, the sort of skeletal structure of the season. And then from there, it's about, basically drilling down into more detailed outlines, putting together, a 1-page, then a 3-page, then a 5-page for each episode. And that's, that's a good couple of weeks at least. And then it's, it's a focus on the first episode, which, can vary depending on the scope of the project. So yeah, if you have anything to add.
No.
But I mean,
Talking about
but
the second question. I think the problem is the toughest thing for a writer trying to stick out is that it's a needle in a stack of needles, right? And especially with really longer form stuff, it's really difficult for the people that are trying to hire for positions to read a 90-page screenplay while also trying to make a game. So I think having a balance of work in your portfolio, having something that's, and for us, because we do so much narrative that it comes from like screenplay backgrounds, like screenwriting backgrounds are something that we look to a lot, TV, movies, but shorter form stuff too, because it's just a thing that will entice people to actually read it, because it's so hard to grab a 90-page script and spend an hour to try and assess whether someone's got it or not. I mean, we're looking for an easier thing too, and I would actually also put emphasis on the first couple pages of whatever your script is. We get a lot of scripts that the entire first 10 pages is just full of like military jargon or science jargon or things that just feel super generic, and it's really hard to get whether there's voice coming through that, because it sounds the same in everything. So starting off strong and kind of putting your best foot forward, even if it's in a 90-page screenplay, the likelihood is that people will at least get through the first 10, first 20.
I'll add that I generally look for two things that are more craft than art. I let more talented people than me vet the art, but the things that we tend to ask of the writers is they have to manage exposition and manage information very delicately. In a Telltale game, every time we tell the player something, it's a candidate piece of information that's going to be important. So we can't just monologue about weird stuff because we might be misinforming people. And there's certain things that have to be unambiguously communicated, that they can't be too subtle. And that's a giant constraint you can come up with a really great little bit of dialogue, and we're like, wow, the cadence is awesome, and it's really full of character, but it really kind of infers that there's something going on that might be important later, and it's not actually going on and important later. So it's beautiful, but it's compromising the player experience. What do we do with that? And seeing writing, particularly stage play or theater, or film, standard script, like novels and short stories are less difficult to see this in. But seeing people who can wield exposition and carefully manage information while keeping character and the dialogue sounding real is super important to us, because the delicacy of like certain data points that have to be communicated about where the character is at and what we're trying to actually tell the player about what's going on is that is an amazing craft in and of itself, and probably the hardest thing that you guys have to do, because you great scenes with great dialogue in them, and you're like, yeah, but this kind of means I need to go find a key. There's something hidden over there, because that's what they're talking about, right? You're like, no, they're just talking about their history and what it was like growing up. And it's really challenging.
Sorry, really quick, but another thing that the only times that the few times that I got traction as someone trying to break in, and what even worked for me here, and this is probably bad advice, but it worked for me, is I wrote samples directly for the projects that I wanted to work on, which in movies and television, everyone tells you don't do that. But what's nice about it is you're almost guaranteed that those people are going to read it, even if that starts out in a shitty way, where they're like, oh, so you think you can write this, do you? And if you impress them, if they look at that and go, shit, this can go into our game, you're way more likely to get them to call you back. So
Yeah.
it's at least worked for me.
I was going to say the same thing. When I applied to Telltale, I actually wrote a Twine game using just season 1 as a baseline. I wouldn't be afraid to get a little creative and show, anybody, if you're applying to anywhere, just show them that you're thinking about like games, and that's always a part of the process applying to the studio, is just like, what games have you played? Have you written for games? And if you can say yes, then it's definitely a bonus, right?
Yeah.
So.
And even if it feels like a lot of work, sorry, but even if it feels like, I feel like this is the thing that people are here for, right? Even if it feels like a lot of work, what it does get you to do is write more, So even if it doesn't work out, you have more samples now that you can go out with. It's current work. It's not a screenplay you worked on 5 years ago, for 3 years. It's actually a representation of who you are as a writer in that moment.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Over on the right.
So I want to confess that I haven't played a Telltale game. I've always been super fascinated by what you guys have done, so forgive me that fault. And please excuse if this question doesn't quite make sense. I wondered.
Sorry.
I wondered.
I was offended, and I had to release that.
Clearly, you guys have moments where there's a choice that's necessary, and clearly, you guys have a super solid foundational understanding of what each character has to do or would do in a certain situation. So my question is, are there any moments in writing a scene or in figuring out a story where you come to a choice that a character is making, but you know that the character would really only make one choice? And I don't want to, no spoilers, but like, for instance, this happens at the end of The Last of Us. They don't give you a choice, really. And it's important, and it's a good decision in my opinion, but do you guys ever get to, like...
Yeah, I think there was definitely moments in Fables when there were things that Bigby had to do. He's a sheriff, right? So there's certain things that he absolutely had to respond to, couldn't ignore, had to do something about. But then trying to allow the player to twist their interpretation of how he got involved. Like with Faith, like, I know this means nothing to you, but like he jumps in the middle of this fight, but then we're trying to give the player the ability to calm it down or heat it up a little bit. But the fight is non-negotiable. Bigby has to split it up. So that does come up at times where the protagonist, which is the player character, has to do things outside of player control, and we try to map that as close as we can to something that the player can hang on to.
And something related to that too is, like, I read a lot of, I read stuff on the internet, which I probably shouldn't do. But people complain that our games aren't branchy enough. But we run into a lot of things where there's a compelling choice for the character to like go right, but going left is boredom town. It is just, you're filling in the blanks at that point. You're really struggling to like, something interesting must be, it's really cool. Like you could choose to, I call them or nots. It's like, I could choose to go up and punch the guy in the face or not. And it's like, that's not a choice. That's asking the player permission to do what we want to do anyway. And we reject that all the time. Like normally we just take the choice out and we're like, no, we want to do the cool thing. So just punch them in the face and we'll figure out something else to do. But you end up, if you just get like mechanically branchy, you end up with most of your energy trying to invent crap to fill in blanks that you're like, I don't know why Big B would be wandering around. Oh, I guess we could invent something. But all of your energy goes to the wrong part of the story. It goes into the fill in the blanks part of the story. And when we get into those situations, we just shut it down pretty quick. And we're like, if it's an or not, we're just like, take it out. It's not interesting.
Thanks.
Tom Abernathy's coming up now.
Yeah, so that's all the time we have for questions in this room, but these guys will be in room 3000 for a little bit afterwards, for those of you who haven't yet got to ask, and those of you who would like to ask more. I'd like to ask everybody to just chill for just 1 second. If you don't mind, let me wrap this whole event up briefly, if I may. I remember a couple of years ago being here. It was a moment when Walking Dead had just come out, BioShock Infinite had just come out, Titanfall was on the way. And I remember having a strange sensation about those three things in sort of, conjunction with each other, because on the one hand, you had a launch title for a major console that it ended up had no solo campaign, no solo narrative campaign at all, right? And on the other hand, you had a game whose ludonarrative dissonance was causing a lot of conversation about the role of story in games. And then you had this other game, which in a lot of conventional senses, as you said, some people would not consider a game at all. It didn't really have anything that really constituted combat. It did, a lot of the things that we associated with that word weren't necessarily present. And I remember feeling a pang of gratitude to what these guys were doing, because, to be honest, at this moment, I made reference earlier today to this being a weird moment for those of us who do this, and at the time I was referring to some kind of different sorts of things, but another way in which it's a weird moment is, to be honest, that story in AAA is to some degree an endangered species at this point. That all the big money for AAA publishers is in multiplayer online, and that seems to be where everything's going. And so the question becomes, given that we know the market actually loves story in games a lot, where are they going to find it? And one of the things that I'm particularly grateful to all of you for, and to what Telltale does for, is that it is shining what is, for me, maybe the strongest beacon of light as to what one of the possible answers to that question is. And I think that's really awesome. So I'm really loving that we're ending with
Thanks. Thanks for inviting us onto the panel. We really appreciate coming here and talking to all you guys. And I want to add, if you want to come and maniacally obsess about all this crap with us, we're hiring, and find one of these cards, and we do look at every portfolio, every writing sample that comes in. If you are indisposed to being just almost borderline destructively obsessed about stories and games and computers, we are Mecca for you. Please come and find us.
That's probably a pretty good description of most of the people in this room, I'm guessing. Yeah. Cool. Well, so, we may or may not be hanging out at a place that I can't talk about tonight. Ask someone if you don't know what I mean. Other than that, I want to say thank you to all you guys, because you guys are the ones who tell us how to make this something good for you, and we listen really hard. So keep telling us, keep coming. And to end, as I always say at the end of this event, if this was your first time, find someone who's never been here in the next year and tell them about it if you enjoyed it and you got something great out of it, and tell them to come and bring them next year, and let's keep growing it and let's keep doing more for story and games, because that's what we love. Thank you.